Episode 1. The Beach. The story begins with Nasir Naz Khan, a shy, academically driven Pakistani-American college student living in Queens, New York. Naz is invited to a party one night, but ends up without a ride. Determined to go, he borrows his father's yellow cab without permission. While driving through Manhattan, Naz accidentally picks up a mysterious young woman named Andrea who mistakes him for a real cab driver. Though he tries to refuse, he becomes intrigued by her carefree attitude. The two spend the evening together, drinking, taking drugs, and eventually heading back to her place. At her apartment, they continue partying, play games involving a knife, and become intimate. Naz eventually passes out in the kitchen. When he wakes up a few hours later, he discovers Andrea brutally stabbed to death in her bed. In a panic, he flees the scene, but leaves behind several clues, including fingerprints, his inhaler, and is seen by a few witnesses. Naz is pulled over for a minor traffic violation, but when police search the cab and later investigate further, he's brought into custody. Though initially treated as a routine arrest, the situation escalates as evidence begins to mount against him. Naz, confused and terrified, doesn't fully understand what's happening. Enter John Stone, a weary, low-rent defense attorney who happens to be at the precinct and takes an interest in Naz's case. Stone sees a vulnerable young man who is clearly out of his depth and decides to represent him, despite the growing complexity of the case. The episode ends with Naz officially becoming a murder suspect. Episode 2. Subtle Beast. Following his arrest, Naz remains in custody, bewildered and overwhelmed by the criminal justice system. His claims of innocence are ignored as the NYPD, led by Detective Box, who begins building what appears to be an airtight case. Detective Box questions Naz with a calm, almost fatherly demeanor, but his questions are calculated to get Naz to confess. Box gathers physical evidence, the bloodstained knife, Naz's injuries, and surveillance footage, all pointing to Naz as the killer. Though he seems convinced of Naz's guilt, there's a quiet, almost imperceptible sense that Box may harbor some doubts. John Stone, a weary, ex-Samaritan defense attorney who happened to catch Naz's case the night of his arrest, attempts to insert himself as Naz's lawyer. He knows how quickly the system can crush someone like Naz and tries to protect him from making fatal missteps, like talking without legal counsel or getting in with the wrong crowd. However, Naz's distraught parents hesitate to trust Stone, viewing him as unprofessional and unqualified, and instead seek help from a family friend to find better representation for their son. As Naz is moved through the system, processing, holding cells, initial court appearances, the show paints a stark, clinical portrait of how easily someone can be consumed by the justice system. Naz begins to grasp the seriousness of his situation, yet remains largely passive, unsure of who to trust. By the end of the episode, Naz is officially charged with murder, and the system has fully engulfed him. Episode 3. A Dark Crate. At Rikers, Naz is quickly introduced to the brutal environment of prison life. He is placed in protective custody, but still finds himself vulnerable to threats and intimidation from both inmates and guards. An inmate with the nickname Pretty Boy makes him a target, and it's clear that surviving in this environment will require adaptation from Naz. Despite his fear, Naz begins to harden, subtly shifting from a panicked, naive student to someone who must learn to protect himself from the hardened prisoners. Meanwhile, John Stone continues to dig into Naz's case, trying to get ahead of the prosecution's narrative. Though he lacks prestige, Stone is determined and observant, believing Naz is truly innocent. He visits the crime scene, talks to Andrea's stepfather, and begins piecing together inconsistencies in the official timeline. His unorthodox methods and appearance make him easy to overlook, but Stone's instincts are sharp, and he senses there's more to the case than what the police have thus far concluded. Detective Box also continues his investigation, reinforcing the case against Naz with forensic evidence, including fingerprint and DNA results. Still, Box maintains a subtle demeanor, never overtly pushing, but gently reinforcing Naz's presumed guilt. This episode symbolizes the claustrophobic and punishing environment of Rikers, as well as the psychological toll the experience takes on Naz. By the end of the episode, Naz begins forming an uneasy alliance with Freddie Knight, a powerful inmate who offers protection, but at a price. The system is swallowing Naz, and the transformation has begun. Episode 4. The Art of War. Naz continues to navigate the dangerous social structure of Rikers Island. while his defense team begins to probe the cracks in the prosecution's case. Inside Rikers, Naz is drawn further under the wing of Freddie Knight, who provides protection, but it becomes increasingly clear that this safety comes with expectations and sacrifices. Naz begins adopting prison survival tactics, including changing his behavior, appearance, and even engaging in low-level rule-breaking to fit in. The transformation from innocent student to hardened inmate continues, and the psychological shift in Naz becomes more pronounced. John Stone, still battling his chronic eczema and professional limitations, continues to push forward with the investigation. He speaks to Andrea's stepfather, Don Taylor, uncovering tensions around Andrea's inheritance and suggesting possible motives outside of Naz. Stone also begins building a theory that challenges the simplicity of the police's timeline and thinks it fits too easily. Despite his lack of resources, Stone begins to uncover valuable leads. Meanwhile, prosecutor Helen Weiss and Detective Box move steadily forward in preparing their case against Naz. Weiss is methodical and confident, while Box, though thorough, begins to show signs of unease. He appears increasingly troubled by Naz's lack of a clear motive and the case's over-reliance on circumstantial evidence. Still, the wheels of justice continue turning, seemingly indifferent to any uncertainty. The episode reflects both the psychological warfare within the prison system and the strategic maneuvering on both sides of the legal battle. Naz is no longer simply reacting, he's adapting to survive. As tensions rise and alliances form, the episode underscores how easily a person's identity can shift under extreme pressure. The question lingers, is Naz still innocent, or is he becoming something else entirely? Episode 5. The Season of the Witch. At Rikers, Naz becomes further entrenched in the prison culture under the guidance of Freddie Knight. He begins lifting weights, shaving his head, and even participating in drug smuggling. The once reserved college student is steadily evolving into someone hardened by his surroundings, adapting to survive in a place that demands toughness over innocence. Freddie continues to mentor him, offering both protection and manipulation, bringing Naz deeper into a world that's as transactional as it is violent. Outside prison walls, John Stone's investigation gains momentum. Though still dealing with debilitating eczema, Stone becomes increasingly focused and determined. He begins to track Andrea's past, discovering a history of drug use and toxic relationships. He interviews people connected to her, including her funeral home director and her former boyfriend, planting seeds of reasonable doubt. Despite being dismissed by many as a second-rate attorney, Stone's persistence and instincts continue to yield meaningful insights. Meanwhile, Naz's family faces financial and emotional ruin from Naz's arrest. Their community ostracizes them, and his father loses the family's taxi medallion after it's impounded as evidence. The growing social stigma and economic hardship weigh heavily on them, amplifying the cost of Naz's alleged crime. Prosecutor Helen Weiss and Detective Box continue to tighten their case, but Box's increasing hesitation is noticeable. He's beginning to question whether the narrative against Naz is as airtight as it seemed. This episode captures the unsettling transformation of Naz and whether or not he will be the same person after all of this, even if acquitted. Episode 6. Samson and Delilah. Naz continues his descent into the harsh realities of prison life. Under the influence of Freddie Knight, he's now fully integrated into the Rikers ecosystem. He's using drugs, lifting weights, and even engaging in violent intimidation. The young man we met in episode 1 seems like a distant memory. His transformation becomes symbolic of the biblical Samson and Delilah, strength and vulnerability twisted by betrayal and manipulation. Freddie offers Naz not just protection but purpose inside, grooming him as an ally within his prison domain. Yet the lines between support and control blur. Freddie gifts Naz with heroin, further tethering him to a dangerous lifestyle. Despite moments of introspection, Naz appears to be losing himself in the persona prison demands for his survival. Outside, John Stone continues investigating leads that could shift the narrative. He finds a crucial break when he learns more about Andrea's troubled relationships, particularly with her stepfather, Don Taylor. Stone suspects Don may have a motive tied to Andrea's inheritance, and his background raises red flags. Stone's obsession with the case grows, even as his eczema worsens and isolates him further from professional support. Naz's family, meanwhile, remains under pressure. Socially shunned and financially devastated, their hope in the legal system fades. A new, high-profile defense attorney, Chandra Kapoor, joins the case, bringing fresh energy and a more polished courtroom strategy. She clashes slightly with Stone, but is dedicated to uncovering the truth for Naz. Detective Box continues gathering evidence, but his quiet skepticism grows. He's beginning to see inconsistencies and feels increasingly uneasy about the case against Naz. Episode 7. Ordinary Death. Naz's trial is in full swing, and the battle between prosecution and the defense intensifies. The episode dives into a courtroom drama while continuing to explore the moral ground and emotional toll on everyone involved. Chandra Kapoor leads the courtroom defense, presenting a compelling case that challenges the prosecution's narrative. She casts doubt on the physical evidence by pointing out its circumstantial nature and focuses attention on other suspects, particularly Andrea's stepfather, Don Taylor. Through cross-examination, Chandra exposes Taylor's financial motives and history of abuse, portraying him as a viable suspect with both opportunity and motive to kill Andrea. Outside the courtroom, John Stone continues his dogged investigation. Though sidelined from the trial itself, he uncovers key information about Andrea's financial affairs and associates, including a new potential suspect, a funeral home worker with a criminal past who had access to Andrea shortly before her death. Stone's eczema condition worsens, symbolizing the physical and emotional price the case is taking on him. Meanwhile, Naz's descent continues inside Rikers. He's fully entrenched in prison life, using heroin and engaging in aggressive behavior. The contrast between who he was and who he's become grows starker. Freddie, his protector, begins to question whether Naz is still worth the risk, especially as Naz's actions become more reckless. Detective Box, despite having built the case against Naz, continues to feel internal conflict. He quietly re-examines details and revisits witnesses, driven by a growing sense that the case may not be as solid as it appeared. As closing arguments approach, the truth remains elusive, buried beneath performance, doubt, and personal agendas. The question of Naz's guilt or innocence hangs heavily, with the emotional weight of everyone's choices coming to a head. Episode 8. The Call of the Wild. Series Finale. In the courtroom, Chandra Kapoor continues to lead Naz's defense, but her growing emotional involvement with him, culminating in a kiss, jeopardizes the integrity of the case. When John Stone finds out about this, he's furious and is forced to take over in court. Though unprepared and inexperienced in high-stakes trials, Stone delivers a surprisingly heartfelt and persuasive closing argument, urging the jury to consider the lack of conclusive evidence and the dangers of assumption. Detective Box, increasingly uneasy about the case, continues investigating on his own. He uncovers damning evidence against Ray Halley, the financial advisor to Andrea's family, who had access, motive, and a history of abuse. Box presents this new lead to prosecutor Helen Weiss, who, despite knowing it could unravel her case, has the moral clarity to drop the charges against Naz if the jury can't come to a decision. The jury ultimately becomes deadlocked, and before a verdict is reached, Weiss chooses not to retry the case. Naz is released from Rikers, but freedom doesn't bring peace. He returns home, only to find he no longer fits into his old life. Traumatized, addicted to heroin, and hardened by prison, he's a changed person, freed legally, but not emotionally. Stone, too, is left changed by the case. Though he earns respect for his courtroom performance, he returns to his lonely routine, still battling eczema and self-doubt. Justice, in the end, is ambiguous. This series reflects on how systems, legal, social, and psychological can transform people. Naz is no longer the boy arrested months ago despite the charges being dropped. The truth about Andrea's murder remains uncertain, but the cost of the experience is clear. In this haunting finale, innocence and guilt blur, and no one escapes untouched. And that is it for the night of. Hope you enjoyed the story as much as I do. Thanks for watching.